Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Weiss, co-chair of Steptoe's International Trade Policy Practice and leader of the firm's supply chain team. Welcome to Supply Chain University, where we dive into the legal, policy, and advocacy issues involving supply chains. To find out more, visit our website at steptoe.com. On this episode, we're talking with Gene Soroka, the Executive Director of the Port of Los Angeles, which is the busiest container port in North America, and we're going to be talking about all things supply chain and goods movement. Gene, thanks so much. We're really excited to have you join us at Supply Chain University.
Great to see you, Jeff. Good afternoon.
So how are things going at the port?
We're busy. We just celebrated two huge milestones. First was in the month of May, we moved 1 million container units. First time ever for our port in its 114-year history, and the first time ever for any port in the Western Hemisphere. And that's on the heels of just crossing the 10 million container mark for fiscal year ending 21. And we still have a month to go to reset that record.
Wow. Anything new on Port Optimizer or other issues on the Cyber Resiliency Center or other issues you're working on?
Yeah, there's so much happening right now. And what we've witnessed, Jeff, over the past year has been a pandemic-induced buying surge, the likes of which we've never seen. As most of us succumb to the stay-at-home orders and safer-at-home requirements, we began buying online, whether it was our daily groceries, our athletic equipment, redoing the kitchen, or simply the basic necessities from our big box retailers. And that import boom continues. In fact, the retail industry has reported that we've doubled internet sales over the last year that took us a decade to build. So that continues. And with all of that comes a lot of complexity. How do we source, procure, transportation, supply chains? All of that is in the news now when normally we're a little bit more behind the scenes and we keep filling our stores and our fulfillment centers so all of us American consumers can buy. But because of the tensions that have been out there, whether they be trade, monetary policy, the surge in buying by all of us here in the United States, we've had a spotlight shine on us. And it tells us that we've got to be able to, one, flex a little better, scale to the requirements of the business, and two, we've got to get smarter digitally. We still have the only port community system nationwide, and we're decades behind Asia, Europe, the Middle East in this area. The Port Optimizer, co-created between the General Electric Transportation Wabtec Company and the Port of Los Angeles, has now rolled out 3 additional modules to answer the needs of our customers during this surge. But more importantly, we need more users of this. And I've called for a nationwide port community system. In fact, yesterday, I testified in front of Congress and a subcommittee of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee on just that fact, that we need to show a heat map, as an example, to the shipping community of where bottlenecks may be, how to avoid them, and an opportunity map on the flip side as to how best they can run their supply chains. With the management of all of this digitization comes the need to keep it secure. And the stewardship,
Right.
much like we've shown in the infrastructure space, now in the digital area. So we created here at the Port of Los Angeles the first and still only cybersecurity operations center at a port nationwide back in September of 2014. That security center now is thwarting and stopping more than 40 million cyber intrusion attempts a month, double what they were from pre-pandemic days.
Wow. So I want to come back to those when we talk a little bit about potential solutions for supply chain resilience a little bit later on. But since you talked about the container flow, and obviously we've all been at home for the last 18 months and buying more consumer goods, as you mentioned, what's the latest on the congestion issues at the port and also on the West Coast more generally?
There's still a lot of work to do, but we're getting better. We've reduced the backlog of ships by 75% since their peak in February through a lot of hard work and rallying the business sector together. Yet our dwell times, the time a container sits at rest here at the port, and once it leaves, headed to the warehouse or to the customer's facility, is still rising. We continue to work with our importers to pick up their cargo as quickly as they can, get it emptied, and bring that container along with the chassis back. The rail dwell times are also problematic. Think of it this way, Jeff. Our vessel productivity has increased by 50% from pre-pandemic days. We're now welcoming 15 container vessels in per day, every day, on average, since the pandemic began. What we've also seen is that we're able to get our longshore men and women out on the job. Their work shifts are up 20% compared to the 3-year running average. Just outstanding support from the dock workers. But our cargo owners have ordered so much. The more than 2 billion square feet of warehousing from the shores of the Pacific out to the Mojave Desert are full and overflowing. The pandemic also caused us to look at work a different way, especially with people who work in teams. So the ability to separate, physically distance, wear face coverings and gloves changed the velocity of throughput on how quickly cargo can transit through these nodes. So we've got to sharpen those areas a little bit, but I'm very pleased that the anchorage now is down to 12 vessels this morning, and we'll have few, if any, probably by the end of this month leading into our peak season, which will traditionally start in August. And that'll be catering to the back-to-school products, fall fashion, and the all-important retail year-end holidays.
And how is the congestion at Yantian affecting operations at the port?
Nothing just yet, but we're watching that closely. I was on the phone last night with some old friends. I'd lived in China for a number of years, so kept those contacts. And about a third of all of our cargo vessels are coming out of South China today, the Pearl River Delta area. What we've seen is that about 50% of capacity is being managed today out of the South China Pearl River Delta ports. So we'll see a little bit of an ebb here in the coming weeks. And then as folks get healthy and back on the job from COVID-19's resurgence there, we'll start to see the volume pick up just a little bit. I don't think it'll be overly detrimental, but another node that we have to watch very carefully and plan for. This is why the port optimizer is so important. It gives us a 3-week upstream look so we can gauge that volume coming in and make sure that we have the assets and the talent on the ground to make things happen.
And you mentioned the back-to-school season coming up. What's your expectation for cargo flow and congestion in the second half of the year?
All indications are volume will be strong for the second half of the year. We'll pivot from this unnatural surge in all of us buying so many products to a traditional peak season and volume continuing. But what we are watching closely for in the second half is how we as American consumers pivot from buying goods to getting back into the service sector. It was so great to see last night Dodger Stadium at near capacity for the game against the Phillies. California opened up yesterday, loosening most of the restrictions that had been put in place for COVID-19. So we'll start going back out to restaurants, to the movies. We'll get on airplanes to go see grandparents and relatives. But that's not happening as quickly as we'll see a leveling off of these imports probably by Q1 of 2022.
And, given your role at the port and also as chief logistics officer for the city, I'm wondering, what are some of the lessons you've learned over the past 18 months in terms of how to keep cargo flowing during pandemics or other crisis situations? Because as you can imagine, there could be other types of situations, not necessarily like this, but there could be a cyber attack. There could be all kinds of other things that could occur, severe weather, for instance. What are some of the lessons you've learned from that?
I think number one is communication. And I had a little bit of a head start. As you remember, I lived in China during the SARS epidemic. So I had firsthand witness to what that may look like. And this was on such a greater scale, obviously. Early on, we stopped all international travel, save one bereavement trip. We stopped all domestic travel in February and made sure that our folks were healthy and safe on the ground. Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti instituted one of the earliest safer at home efforts and telecommuting programs for our 45,000 City of Los Angeles employees, including us here at the port. And what we did from there was become early adopters of this video meeting phenomenon. We began holding monthly press conferences on operations and activities at the port. We started, like many others, meeting with our customers and clients over these video meetings so we could make sure we kept the information flowing quickly. And we went from holding conference calls on spider phones to having meetings with hundreds of participants so we could get our message out there, but more importantly, get their feedback on what we needed to get done on the ground. We also stepped in a major way to help our employers and our longshore workers to make sure they had a safe environment on the docks. We brought in cleaning equipment and solutions really quick. We got folks to work on their contracts to make sure there were provisions for health and safety, and we opened up this port day in and day out to move the nation's goods. And that was so important because, as you know, the cargo that moves through this port reaches each and every one of our nation's 435 congressional districts. The responsibility was outsized, but I believe we met the challenge.
So one last question. I know that there was a House T&I subcommittee hearing on supply chain congestion issues yesterday that you participated in. As you know, there are some calling on Congress to provide the FMC with additional authority, potentially reforming the Shipping Act. Just wanted to get your take on whether you think the FMC needs additional tools, for example, to address cargo availability issues, whether they should make a greater use of existing tools, some combination. Just wanted to get your thoughts on that question.
Yeah, the FMC has 5 very strong commissioners and led by Chairman Maffei, who was a 2-term congressman for the United States. These folks know what they're doing. And having them as an oversight body, regulatory enforcement, et cetera, is a good move and continues to be for the industry. But this is still a relationship-based business. I don't know that there's a way we could legislate ourselves out of this pandemic-induced buying surge that we've witnessed. Port congestion, private sector needs, shippers, importers, exporters requirements. It's about working together. And I think what that committee hearing yesterday showed is that we've got people that need attention, and as industry, we better pay attention to them. As imports do level off at some point, only because our discretionary savings go in different directions, these private sector companies are going to need the American exporter at a day coming very soon. And so it's in our best interest collectively, public and private entities, just like the Port of Los Angeles, to make sure we fine-tune this approach. And Jeff, the real solve for here is that most of our imports go to major metropolitan areas. Most of our exports emanate from rural America. How do we square that circle to move the assets, the talent, and everything around to service both of those unique customers in our supply chain? And in my view, it's through digitization, showing where we have cargo equipment, services available, a heat map, if you will, to avoid congested areas, and an opportunity map on the flip side to be able to show where the path of least resistance is in the supply chains is our way to go. And if we're going to be good stewards of that data, we've got to take care of it in a safe and secure way, which is now why we've introduced the Cyber Resilience Center, which is a way not only to protect the port, but the port's private sector partners. Think of it as a neighborhood cyberhood watch, getting folks involved under a cloak of anonymity, of course, so we don't impact anyone commercially. But if you see something, say something, and we could watch out for our interest in a broader coverage area than ever before.
And there have been some proposals to set up databases on manufacturing capacity to connect folks within the supply chain. So that dovetails really nicely with those proposals. But let's hold that thought for now, and let's come back and have another discussion, part 2 of our discussion coming up next on solutions. But I just want to thank you so much for joining us for this episode. This has been fantastic, and really appreciate your coming on.
Thank you, Jeff. Great to see you.
So that's it for this edition of Supply Chain University. You can find this and all of our videos at steptoe.com. You can also find us on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you soon.